Republican Senator Ron Johnson repeatedly alleged wrongdoing by the president's son, Hunter Biden, during the past year. Taking to the Senate floor, the Wisconsin Republican has detailed the alleged shady business deals, many of them international, engaged in by the younger Biden while his father was vice president. Republicans have long claimed that Hunter Biden, as well as the president's brother James, and potentially Joe Biden himself, have engaged in corrupt behavior. Hunter Biden has admitted to past struggles with substance abuse, but has steadfastly claimed that he has never engaged in improper business dealings. His father has long stood by his side as well.
Senator Johnson to provide additional examples of the media's attack last Congress. I yield the floor.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. I first want to thank the senior senator from the state of Iowa for his tenacity in pursuing the truth and ignoring all the false attacks leveled against us during the course of our multi-year investigations into corruption at the highest levels of the federal government. Both of us have been firsthand witnesses and at the same time victims of the dishonesty of our Democrat Senate colleagues and their willing accomplices in the media. When it comes to our investigation into the vast web of foreign financial entanglements of the Biden family, those attacks have had one goal in mind: to cover up the extent to which President Biden might be, and almost certainly is, compromised. Over the course of our investigation into how Hunter Biden used his father's position and name to enrich himself and his family, the dishonest press published countless stories reporting on the Democrats' false charge that Senator Grassley and I were soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. Once we issued our September and November 2020 reports, which were based almost exclusively on U.S.-sourced documents and interviews with U.S. citizens, the media largely ignored it. When they did write a story, they declared that our reports found nothing new, a classic media cover-up. I've always said the bias in the media is revealed far more in what they don't report than what they actually do report. But all the false attacks did not deter us. We have continued to uncover the truth, and fortunately, our reports also served as a catalyst for others to come forward and for more investigative journalists to keep digging. The American people deserve the truth. That's why we're presenting additional evidence today and over the next few days. For example, this is the first time this document is being made public. As Senator Grassley described in detail, it shows that money from CEFC, which is effectively an arm of the Chinese government, went directly to Hunter Biden. Bank records like this piece of evidence are pretty hard to deny and sweep under the rug. Our reports were chock full of irrefutable evidence like this, and yet the media buried those details in an attempt to keep it hidden from the American people. Because the mainstream media and our Democrat colleagues had no substance to refute our reports, they reverted to their time-honored tradition of lying, making false accusations against us, and engaging in the politics of personal destruction. Again, their goal was to destroy the credibility of our reports before the American people even had a chance to read them. They were fully aware that the lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its shoes. For example, listen to what New York Times journalist Nicholas Fandos said about our report. Quote, "Lack of meaningful new information," unquote. And again, quote, "Overlap with a Russian disinformation campaign," unquote. The then Democrat minority leader was quoted saying about our report, quote, "as if Putin wrote it, not United States senators." A Democrat senator described our investigation as being, quote, rooted in disinformation, end quote, from Russian operatives. Separately, a Democrat senator also said about our report, quote, bottom line, the Johnson-Grassley investigation is baseless. It is laundering Russian propaganda for circulation in the U.S., unquote. But of course, all those quotes were disinformation. Disinformation designed to distract all of us from the truth. As Senator Grassley reiterated, our reports were based almost exclusively on government records from the Obama administration and transcribed interviews of government officials. So, how did the Democrats and the liberal media allies carry out this false attack on us? We described part of what they did in Section 10 of our September 2020 report. Their disinformation and smear campaign against us in our reports was extensive. But in the interest of time, I'll give you a shorter Cliff Notes version. On July 13, 2020, then Minority Leader Schumer, Senator Warner, Speaker Pelosi, and Representative Schiff sent a letter to the FBI to express a purported belief that Congress was the subject of a foreign disinformation campaign. The letter included a classified attachment that had unclassified elements that attempted to tie Senator Grassley's and my work to Andrei Derkach, a Russian agent. The Democrats speculated that based on this unclassified information, Senator Grassley and I had received materials from Derkach. This was false. Nothing could be further from the truth. But this information purportedly linking Senator Grassley and I to Derkach was leaked to liberal media outlets to start a false narrative to smear us. Until news reports of this false allegation surfaced, I had never even heard of Andrei Derkach. We immediately and forcefully denied the false allegation, but Democrats and the media continued to spread the lie. To this day, no one has ever apologized to either us for spreading that lie, even though it is proven conclusively to be a lie and disinformation. Next, my staff and Senator Grassley's staff did a transcribed interview with George Kent. During that interview, Democrat staff members introduced Derkach's materials into our record. Then Democrat staff members asked Mr. Kent about it. He stated, quote, "What you're asking me to interpret is a master chart of disinformation and malign influence." That was Mr. Kent's evaluation of the Derkach disinformation that Democrats were spreading, that they entered into our record. So the actual truth of the matter is that Democrats, not Senator Grassley nor I, introduced known Russian disinformation into our investigatory record. They did the exact thing they were falsely accusing us of doing. Again, not my staff, not Senator Grassley's staff. Democrats were disseminating Russian disinformation, just like they did with the Steele dossier. Then ranking members Wyden and Peters sent me and Senator Grassley a letter asking for an intelligence briefing relating to our investigation. Now, such a briefing was completely unnecessary, but it was an effort by our Democrat colleagues to further falsely taint our investigation, hoping to discredit it and discredit the truth. On July 28, 2020, Senator Grassley and I reminded them that the FBI and relevant members of the intelligence community had already briefed the committees in March of 2020 and assured us that there was no reason to discontinue our investigation. Then in August 2020, Senator Grassley and I were provided a briefing from the FBI, a briefing that we did not request, that was also leaked to the press to further smear us. This unsolicited FBI briefing was also not necessary and was completely irrelevant to the substance of our investigation. The FBI briefers did tell us that they weren't there to, quote, quash, curtail, or interfere, unquote, in our investigation in any way. No government entity ever warned us that our investigation into the Biden family's financial deals was connected to any kind of Russian disinformation campaign, because it wasn't. But again, the substance of that FBI briefing was later leaked and contorted to smear us, which was exactly why we suspect we were given the unsolicited briefing in the first place. Those briefers promised confidentiality. Clearly, that confidentiality was breached and resulted in another smear operation on Senator Grassley and I to deflect allegations of corruption and conflict of interest that could compromise a President Biden. To date, we do not know who all was involved in this smear campaign. But even after repeated requests, Director Wray and Director Haynes have refused to come in and fully explain who requested and directed this briefing and why it was provided. I think we know why it was provided. So to review, senior Democrats and liberal media cooperated to smear me and Senator Grassley with false accusations of receiving and spreading Russian disinformation. They created documents, leaked them, asked for briefings, and then leaked those too. And then they themselves disseminated Russian disinformation. You can't make this up. Fortunately, they failed to discredit our investigation because we stayed true to government records. We stayed true to the facts and the evidence. And the evidence is stunning, and it is growing. Over the next few days, Senator Grassley and I will come to the floor to present additional evidence that has not yet been made public. These records show extensive connections between the Biden family and elements of the communist Chinese regime. We're talking high-dollar transactions, some of which we've already highlighted in our September and November 2020 reports. But our speeches will introduce new financial documents into the record for all to see. Now, we expect Democrats and the media to continue to use their power to smear us and cover up for the Bidens. But the truth has a power of its own, and we intend to continue to reveal the truth. Madam President, I yield the floor. As my colleague, the senior senator from Iowa, has shown, Hunter Biden and James Biden received millions of dollars from companies connected to the communist Chinese regime. But frankly, it's worse than that. These companies were effectively an arm of the Chinese government. This isn't Russian disinformation. These are hard facts backed up by bank records of actual financial records and transactions that prove just how connected the Bidens were and how compromised President Biden probably is. I'll use this next series of transactions to prove my point. The first chart here shows a bank record showing a $1 million wire transfer into the account of Hudson West 3 from CEFC Limited on November 2nd, 2017. As Senator Grassley and I have already established, CEFC is effectively an arm of the communist Chinese regime. It is also important to note that at the time of this transfer, in November 2017, Hunter Biden was already invested in and providing management for Hudson West 3. So a company that was effectively an arm of the Chinese government transferred $1 million in November 2017 to a company that Hunter Biden is managing and is invested in. I'll just bring up the second record. Focus on the $1 million wire out on March 22nd, 2018. Again, this is a record from Hudson West 3's bank account. Like the previous record, this is showing the transfer of $1 million, but this time the money is being transferred out of Hudson West 3 to Owasco, another one of Hunter Biden's firms. This transfer took place on March 22, 2018, a little less than 5 months after the $1 million transfer from CEFC to Hudson West 3. Hunter is transferring $1 million between two firms he manages and has ownership in. So what is the purpose of these two $1 million transfers? This next record seems to answer that question. This record shows Owasco's receipt of the March 22, 2018 $1 million transfer. It also shows what the transfer is for on the OBI line. OBI is an abbreviation for originating beneficiary information. It's like the memo line on your personal check. It tells you really what that check was about. In this case, the OBI indicates the transfer is being made for, quote, Dr. Patrick Ho Chi Ping representation, unquote. So to recap, on November 2nd, 2017, Patrick Ho's company, CEFC, wired $1 million to Hunter Biden's company, Hudson West 3. On March 22nd, 2018, Hudson West 3 wired $1 million to Owasco, another Hunter Biden company. The bank record clearly states the $1 million payment was being made for the purpose of representing Patrick Ho. Represent him for what? Here's where things get interesting. We know that Patrick Ho was arrested by U.S. authorities in November 2017 for international bribery and money laundering charges. Keep in mind that this arrest occurred in the same month that Patrick Ho's company, CEFC, is wiring $1 million to Hunter Biden's company, Hudson West 3. According to the Department of Justice, quote, Ho orchestrated and executed two bribery schemes to pay top officials of Chad and Uganda in exchange for business advantages for CEFC China, a Shanghai-based multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that operates in multiple sectors, including oil, gas, and banking, end quote. These are crimes for which Patrick Ho was eventually convicted and sent to federal prison for committing. So the company that Patrick Ho was making bribes for sends $1 million to a company Hunter Biden manages and is invested in. That company in turn transfers $1 million to another Hunter Biden company for the purposes of representing Patrick Ho, who was eventually convicted of international bribery and money laundering. And guess what Patrick Ho did around the same time he's arrested by the FBI for corruption and bribery? He contacted James Biden, President Biden's brother. Patrick Ho's decision to call the Biden family around the same time he got arrested is revealing, particularly in light of the fact that the same month $1 million just happened to be transferred to Hunter Biden's company. Now, Hunter Biden isn't a criminal defense attorney. Patrick Ho was charged and convicted for bribery, and related federal offenses and crimes. So what kind of representation was Patrick Ho's company paying Hunter Biden's firm to provide? Were they paying for his firm's legal expertise or for Hunter's political connections? In March 2021, Senator Grassley and I asked the Justice Department about Patrick Ho. Why? Because there's a federal court filing that says the department has FISA records on Patrick Ho. We requested these records. In response, the department would not confirm whether they even had his records. Unfortunately, the Attorney General refuses to clarify that outrageous contradiction for Congress. Oh, and one more tidbit. In a recently uncovered audio extracted from his laptop, Hunter Biden referred to Patrick Ho as, quote, the expletive deleted spy chief of China, unquote. Let that sink in a minute. Hunter Biden referred to Patrick Ho in an audio as the, quote, expletive deleted spy chief of China, unquote. This quote alone tells you that Hunter Biden knew exactly who he was dealing with. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. He was dealing with the, quote, expletive deleted spy chief of China. Now that fact should alert the media and our Democrat colleagues to seriously consider the implications of the Biden family's vast web of foreign financial entanglements have in the conduct of this administration's foreign policy and our national security, but I'm not holding my breath. In October 2020, Senator Grass and I requested to interview Hunter and James Biden about their financial dealings. If they had nothing to hide, they could have volunteered to come in and sit for an interview. If there was an innocent explanation for these foreign financial transactions, they could have used that interview to clarify what those transactions were about. Unfortunately, rather than being transparent, honest, and forthcoming, they declined to speak for us or to us. Their silence speaks volumes. Fortunately, facts are stubborn things. As the Bidens, our Democrat colleagues, and the media is learning, it is difficult to keep them hidden forever. Senator Grassley and I will continue to investigate the Biden family's foreign financial entanglements and provide the American people with the truth to the best of our ability. Our challenge is the deep state does not give up its secrets easily. New evidence of Biden family influence peddling is surfacing on a regular basis, often coming from records from Hunter Biden's laptop. The same laptop, by the way, that the media and deep state foreign intelligence agency officials strongly inferred, was, you guessed it, Russian disinformation. And their guile worked. Prior to the election, people bought the fact that that laptop was probably Russian disinformation. It wasn't, as the New York Times just admitted about a year too late, more than a year too late, that laptop is authentic, and the evidence it is producing is real. But of course, that laptop wasn't Russian disinformation, nor is any of the information we presented in our reports and here on the floor of the Senate. We may never know all the details of the Biden family foreign entanglements or the full extent to which those entanglements compromise our current president, but I'm pretty confident I know who does know. Intelligence operatives in Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Elements within our U.S. intelligence agencies probably also know. They're just not going to tell us or you, the American people. Senator Grass and I will return for our third speeches in this series on the Biden family's foreign financial entanglements. Until then, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
From Wisconsin.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. What Senator Grassley and I have shown over the course of 6 speeches are the actual bank records of financial transactions tying President Biden's son, Hunter, and his brother, James, to businesses that are essentially the arms of the communist Chinese regime. But the Biden business ventures include activities in many more countries than just China. In our September and November 2020 reports, we showed a vast web of Biden family foreign financial entanglements that were largely ignored by the media and falsely labeled Russian disinformation by our Democrat colleagues. As outrageous as the suppression of our reports and the false attacks were, perhaps the most egregious behavior came from 51 former intelligence agency officials who lent their names and reputations to an effort designed to convince the American public that Hunter Biden's laptop had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation, unquote. Without any evidence backing their assertion, They engaged in their own, quote, information operation, unquote, by signing a public letter right before the election. Their letter was actual disinformation, coming from what are supposed to be trusted former members of our U.S. intelligence agencies. They shall be ashamed and held accountable for spreading this disinformation. By signing that disinformation letter, they reinforced false claims that the records on the laptop were not legitimate. By casting doubt on evidence of the Biden's corrupt practices, these former intelligence officials interfered in the 2020 election to a far greater extent than Russia could have ever hoped to achieve. Their willing accomplices in the press amplified this disinformation letter, and by doing so, were equally guilty of egregious election interference. In August 2020, I wrote a public letter detailing the history, purpose, and goals of my oversight investigations. In that letter, I laid out the timeline of Joe and Hunter Biden's involvement in Ukraine. The timeline is very revealing. It starts in February 2014. That was the month of the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. 2 months later, on April 16, 2014, then Vice President Biden met with his son's business partner, Devon Archer, who is now a convicted felon at the White House. I just want to pause and just let that sink in a little bit. Devon Archer is now a convicted felon. He got a meeting in the White House with the Vice President of the United States. That's kind of a big deal. The press didn't ask many questions. 5 days after that meeting in the White House, April 21st, Joe Biden visited Ukraine, and the media described him as, quote, the public face of the administration's handling of Ukraine. The next day, on April 22nd, Devon Archer joined the board of Burisma. What a coincidence. On April 28th, 6 days later, British officials seized $23 million from the London bank accounts of Burisma's owner, Mykola Zlochevsky. Let that sink in a little bit. 6 days after Devon Archer joined the board of Burisma, a day after Vice President Biden visited Ukraine, which was 5 days after he met with Devon Archer in the White House, British officials seized $23 million from the corrupt owner of Burisma. On May 13th, 2014, 3 weeks later, Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma. What a coincidence. Because of the findings in our reports and the excellent investigative journalism on the part of John Solomon, we also now know that Hunter was involved with Elena Baturina, the corrupt and now sanctioned wife of the former mayor of Moscow, during the exact same period of time. On February 14th, 2014, Baturina wired $3.5 million to Rosemont Seneca Thornton, an investment firm co-founded by Hunter Biden. Between April 4th and April 5th, 2014, again, the same month that Joe Biden met with Devon Archer in the White House, Devon became a member of the board of Burisma. Hunter Biden and Devon Archer sent emails about meeting with Baturina, potentially relating to a business deal in Chelsea, New York. On April 13, 2014, 9 days before Devon Archer joined the board of Burisma, Hunter Biden and Devon Archer discussed a potential deal involving Baturina. Archer wrote to Baturina, quote, confirmed green light to fund deposit, unquote. Archer continued, quote, just spent 2 hours on the phone with Kiev. I am confident at this point this is a good, if not life-changing deal if the Ukraine doesn't collapse in the meantime. It's quite interesting to see how much significant activity involving the Bidens and corrupt actors in Russia and Ukraine occurred within a 6-week period, only 2 months after the Ukrainian Revolutionary Dignity. It sure looks like they intended to cash in on the turmoil in Ukraine. In my August 2020 letter, I listed a number of questions about then Vice President Biden's interaction with Hunter Biden's business partner and other family members' foreign financial dealings. In making this letter public, my hope was that the press, the very uninquisitive press, would begin to ask then presidential candidate Joe Biden these important and legitimate questions. It should come to no surprise that the corporate media was completely uninterested and failed to conduct any investigative journalism. Nearly 2 years after I wrote this public letter, the mainstream media has still not adequately pressed President Biden for answers to these very legitimate questions. For example, number one, why did Joe Biden meet with Devon Archer at the White House on April 16, 2014? What did they discuss? Did they discuss anything related to Ukraine, Hunter Biden, or Burisma? Number two, was Joe Biden aware that Devon Archer joined the board of Burisma 6 days after that meeting, 1 day after he visited Ukraine? Three, does Joe Biden believe Burisma and its owner are corrupt? Number four, when did Joe Biden first become aware that Hunter Biden also joined the board of Burisma? Five, when did Joe Biden first become aware of how much money Hunter Biden was being compensated by Burisma? Senator Grassley in my report showed it is close to $4 million. Number six, what does Joe Biden know about Hunter or James Biden's dealings with China? Number seven, what does Joe Biden know about financial benefits his brother and sister-in-law have obtained because of their relationships to him? Investigative reporter John Solomon has added a few more questions to my list, including what? Number one, what, if anything, did Joe Biden know about his son's dealings with Russian oligarch Alina Baturina? Number two, in 2017, a series of memos referred to a Chinese business deal that involved Hunter Biden and included a 10% equity for the, quote, big guy, unquote. What did Joe Biden know about this specific deal and who was, quote, the big guy, unquote? Number three, emails on Hunter Biden's laptop, now in the possession of the FBI, refer to shared accounts or bills between Joe Biden and Hunter. Did Hunter ever give Joe Biden any money, gift, or financial benefit from Hunter's business dealings? After a long overdue analysis, the New York Times and Washington Post have finally admitted that records from Hunter's laptop are authentic, which means, although they will never admit this, the Senator Grassley and I were right and they were wrong. It is interesting to read how limited and muted their mea culpas are. My guess is that they learned a lot from their coverage of Nixon's Watergate scandal cover-up. They learned that when you've been caught in a cover-up, and that is what has happened here, you try to limit the damage by telling a little bit of the truth. In the intelligence world, this strategy is called, quote, a limited hangout, unquote. The Watergate co-conspirators called it, quote, a modified limited hangout, unquote. Regardless of what you call it, what the New York Times and the Washington Post are doing is not telling the whole truth. I doubt they ever will. But just in case they decide to pursue the truth with a little bit more rigor, they can use the above list of relevant questions as a good starting point for what they should be asking President Biden. For our part, Senator Grassley and I will continue to ask tough questions, review more information and records, and transparently provide that information to the American public. We intend to pursue and uncover the truth. I will now turn the floor back over to Senator Grassley for his closing remarks.
Mr. President.
Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think based on the morning panel and this panel as well, we're talking about a problem that is my true definition of a problem, one that does not have easy solutions. Again, what is harmful content is all in the eye of the beholder. We all abhor violence. I certainly condemn white supremacists. I condemned, immediately, forcefully, repeatedly the violence on January 6th. But I am concerned about the bias of your platforms. The earlier panel would not give me any indication whatsoever. The percentage of liberals versus conservatives in your organizations. I don't expect you'll be any more forthright in that. But let me ask you this question. I know the chairman likes to talk about the white supremacists and January 6th. Democrats love talking about that. What about the 570-plus riots that occurred in the summer of 2020, 2,000 law enforcement officers injured, $1 to $2 billion worth of property damage, a couple of people killed in Kenosha, Wisconsin, dozens of buildings burned, a couple dozen people also lost their lives during those riots. Mr. Cox, have you deplatformed, or have you throttled back or censored anybody that was involved in the organization of the summer riots?
Senator, these were
pretty quick answer. I got a lot of territory to cover.
Senator, domestic terrorism and extremism and calls for violence are against our community.
Did you throttle back? Did you censor anybody that organized the summer riots? 570 of them.
Senator, I can look at the specifics.
Okay, Mr. Mohan, did YouTube throttle back or censor any of the rioters in the summer 2020?
Senator, our policies apply equally regardless of who the
perpetrators
are.
So did you throttle back? Did you censor some of the organizations that were responsible for the summer riots?
We would have applied our policies equally regardless of where the riots were if it was a violation.
Can you provide me with the names of the people you throttled back that were responsible for the summer riots?
Senator, I'm happy to follow up.
Okay, good. I appreciate that. Mr. Sullivan, what about Twitter?
Twitter would have removed any incitement to violence that was on our platform, regardless of
So you did throttle back on organizers of the summer riots?
For any case where we see incitement to violence, we would remove that content and take
So
action.
your CEO, Mr. Dorsey, was before a Commerce Committee, I think it was in October 2020, and both Senator Cruz and I asked him whether your platform, Twitter, could impact our elections, and he denied it. Our three witnesses earlier this morning, completely disagreed with Mr. Dorsey, said they absolutely, Twitter and these platforms can. Do you believe that Twitter can impact our elections?
I think Twitter plays an important role in the public conversation.
It's really kind of a yes or no answer. Can they impact our elections?
We're taking the
elections. Really, yes or no? I got a lot of coverage.
As I described to the previous question, we've put in place many actions and mitigations relating to elections.
Can you impact elections?
People try to use our platform to get messages out regarding elections, and we try to do our best to get
this morning I specifically talked about the fact that you censored the New York Post article about Hunter Biden. We have polls that said that had the American public known that, we wouldn't be in the ditch that we are right now. Mr. Mohan, do you believe YouTube can impact elections?
Senator, there's an open public debate that happens on YouTube every day, whether it's
Can you impact? I mean, it's really a pretty simple yes or no answer.
Senator, YouTube is an open platform where there is debate.
And Mr. Cox, do you believe that Facebook can impact elections?
Senator, I think the public discussion that happens on our platforms are a part of the public
But you don't think
discourse.
by censoring material that you, specifically your management, can impact elections? Not what's occurring on your platform, but your management, your decisions, your censoring of information. Can you impact elections?
Senator, respectfully, with respect to the New York Post story you referenced, we did not.
I know you throttled it back, but I mean, can you, again, I'm not asking about that specifically. Do you have the power? Our earlier witness, Mr. Redder, said, a small group of people run these companies and have substantial power over shaping the reality for billions of people. Can you just be honest? By the way, our earlier panel basically to paraphrase, said, don't believe a word you guys are going to tell us. But can you at least be honest with the American public and say, yeah, you have that power. You can impact the elections. Can you be honest with them, or are you going to sit there and say, well, you know, people talk about things on our platforms?
Senator, we do think transparency about our decision-making around our content, around not just terrorism, but around misinformation. We take all of these areas of content seriously, and we publish our work. We do think the public deserves to know what our policies are and how we enforce them.
Listen, I think we all agree this is a big problem. It's my definition of a problem. There's no easy solution. As chairman of this committee, I would meet with Facebook, and I appreciate what they were trying to do to pull down Islamic terror type of content. So I think we all agree that we don't want to be disseminating extremist, violent, inducing type of behavior through these platforms, but we also need to protect free speech as well. So it's a real tension. It's a real balancing act. I think Mr. Boland, I think you said, talked about the term extremism and harmful content. But I guess that's all in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult to define. And I guess what I want to focus on a little bit is, you know, where do we draw the line in terms of taking down content that we all would agree is extreme and could induce violence versus censoring legitimate political debate? I don't know, Mr. Roeder, do you have any idea what percentage of Twitter employees are conservative versus liberal?
I have no idea.
You think it's probably pretty heavily tilted to the left, correct?
I don't know.
Well, I think you do. Mr. Bowen, would you want to answer that question?
I just don't know. I mean,
okay. Mr. Kane? It's obvious, but
my only knowledge is China tech and TikTok. I'm not as familiar with that area.
So let me move on. Let me use an example that I think we're all aware of. Okay, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Let's talk about the Hunter Biden laptop. Mr. Roeder, do you believe that, like Washington Post, that there's authentic information on that laptop?
I'm not sure. I will say that these are massive platforms. They're billions of pieces of content.
I've got very little time.
Okay. I don't know.
Mr. Bowen, do you know whether, do you assume that's authentic information on the laptop?
I don't have an opinion on the laptop.
Oh, okay. So Twitter was actually very effective when they blocked the New York Post articles on the Hunter Biden laptop. We had Jack Dorsey in front of the Commerce Committee back in, I think, October 2020, and both Senator Cruz and myself asked him, because we were talking about, you know, Russians using the platforms to impact our elections, and everybody agrees that could happen. We asked Mr. Dorsey, do you believe Twitter could impact the election? Mr. Dorsey said no. Mr. Roeder, do you believe Twitter has the capability of impacting the election?
I think all these social platforms, they're so massive, it's hard to believe that they're not impacting.
Mr. Bowen, do you believe that as well?
Yeah, these platforms absolutely have influence, and I believe they influence.
Mr. Kane?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there is a problem right there, okay? And I appreciate you acknowledging that fact. You know, we had 51 former intelligence officials. I have no idea on what basis they wrote this letter. They came out immediately. I think it might be, you know, because the FBI had a scheme in August of 2020 to downplay the derogatory information on the Hunter Biden laptop. But they came out and said that the laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian information operation. Seems to me like that letter itself was an information operation. So we have this platform that censored. The platform censored that. Facebook throttled it back. We actually took a poll on this. I didn't, but a company called Media Research Center poll. This was after the election, 1,715 voters, 750 voters in 7 swing states of Biden voters who were unaware of the emails, text, testimony, banking transactions on the laptop, as well as Senator Grassley's and my report, which was based on interviews with U.S. persons and U.S. documents, okay? And 79% of those Biden voters said they would still vote for him, but 16% said they would not. 4% they'd either switch their vote to President Trump, 4% would vote for third party, 4% would skip voting altogether, 5% would not have voted at all. Pretty strong evidence that what Facebook and Twitter did impacted the 2020 election to a far greater extent than anything Russia ever could have hoped to have done in 2016 or 2020. I want to talk about a little other disinformation coming out of this committee. The day or two after Senator Grassley and I issued our report, based on U.S. documents, interviews with U.S. persons, our now committee chairman, who was then committee ranking member, issued a press release, said, Peters Wyden responds to a Republican effort to amplify Russian disinformation. He said, I generated a partisan political report that is rooted in Russian disinformation. Mr. Chairman, do you want to retract that false allegation now? Now that we know that the Hunter Biden laptop is accurate, that there has not been one scintilla of information provided in Senator Grassley's and my report that has ever been refuted. It was 100% accurate. And yet you, as ranking member of the committee, accused me repeatedly of soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. Do you want to retract your false allegation here that you issued in your press release on September 23rd?
No, let's just focus on what we're trying to...
Well, I'm focusing on this because this is exactly the type of harm we can do to our political process when you have these big tech companies engaging in political debate, censoring one side of the political spectrum and amplifying the false allegations of another side. Do any one of you want to dispute that?
Well, Senator, I think it's important that we get the data to know. This is why the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act is so critical to our globe and our nation, is that if you were able to look at the data to understand what had happened from content moderation and you were able to see the distribution, you could compare that data across the platforms and see what sort of impact that it had. Absent that, there's a lot of conjecture.
So let me just, one part of it, transparency, would be to at least have people who at least used to work or work for these platforms to at least acknowledge the highly political nature of the individuals that work in them. Just acknowledge it. I mean, it's obvious to everybody. I mean, Mr. Zuckerberg spent, what, about $500 million impacting the 2020 election, took over the Green Bay election system in a highly partisan fashion. About 95% of the money he spent were in Democrat strongholds in Wisconsin. Can we at least acknowledge that there's enormous political activity going on, partisan activity going on within these social media companies, rather than just try and bury it? Let's be honest. Let's be transparent, but let's be honest in our transparency.
I agree with you on the request for transparency. My experience, outside of whether someone had a certain political leaning or not, I didn't see political leanings shape the decisions that were made inside the company, per my experience and what I saw.
Okay, well, I saw it in their censoring the New York Post article prior to the 2020 election, and I think it's pretty obvious. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, you made a comment here in answer to the chairman's questioning that you were committed to working with this committee. You'll excuse me if I find those words ring incredibly hollow. I had to subpoena you as chairman of this committee. I really didn't get anything. I've written repeated letters, either with no response whatsoever or a non-response response. It's one of the reasons, and I'm very grateful to all the whistleblowers that are coming forward to various committees, to various members, people of integrity within your organizations, blowing the whistle on the corruption at some of the highest levels of the FBI. First question, do you commit publicly that the FBI will not retaliate against those whistleblowers?
Senator, we will not retaliate against whistleblowers. I take the protections that are in law and regulation of whistleblowers extremely seriously.
Good, we'll hold you to that. Okay,
just like next. I take compliance with all of our other rules very seriously.
Senator Grassley wrote you a letter on July 25th of 2020 in which he said that whistleblowers to his office reported that FBI officials initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden for the purpose of shutting down investigatory activity related to his potential criminal exposure by labeling it quote, disinformation. Boy, that's a familiar term. That scheme was hatched in August of 2020. Also included, he said, in August 2020, FBI supervisory intelligence analyst Brian Otten opened an assessment which was used by FBI headquarters team to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as disinformation and cause investigative activity to cease. Have you responded to Senator Grassley's letter that he wrote over 3 months ago?
Senator, I know there have been a whole slew of letters. I believe we've responded to a number of them, but sitting here right now, I can't tell you which ones we've responded to and which ones.
Have you looked into those charges that there was a scheme hatched in August 2020 to downplay the derogatory information on Hunter Biden? Have you looked into that personally?
We have, as we speak, a number of personnel matters that are underway, and for as reasons I'm sure you can appreciate, we can't discuss.
Well, I know that's always your
personnel
excuse.
matters.
No, I got it. I understand how you remain above the law by using that excuse repeatedly. The reason I'm a little sensitive on August 2020 is that on August 6th, both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by members of the FBI, which I knew immediately was a setup. No new information whatsoever. I knew it was a setup, and I was correct because 9 months later, on May 1st, it was leaked to the Washington Post to smear me. I have written you publicly a number of times asking who directed that briefing. Are you prepared to tell me in public who directed that briefing now?
Senator, first off, I can't discuss specific defensive briefings more broadly, and that's a longstanding practice.
So tell me then, why have you refused to meet with us to privately tell us who directed that briefing?
So, if I may finish my answer to the question. It's longstanding practice not to discuss specific defensive briefings. We have, as my understanding, responded in writing to a letter that you sent. I think
it's bureaucratic gobbledygook is what that is. That's not a response.
We offered in that letter to provide a senior executive of the FBI to walk through in detail our process.
What your process is, but not specifically who directed a briefing that was used to smear me. Have you looked into the leaking of that briefing to the Washington Post? Have you investigated that?
I'm not going to discuss specific investigations. As to the briefing question and who directs it, let me be very clear about this. When it comes to election-related defensive briefings, there is not a single person who makes that decision. That is an interagency process that was set up by the prior administration, signed off on by the former president, Office of the Director of National
persons in that interagency, correct? So there would be persons. So we should know who those persons are. Why won't you tell us who directed that briefing, the persons then?
I would refer you to the process that was put in place, and we can give you more information about the process if you would like.
Have you read Senator Grassley's and my report on Hunter Biden's corruption issued in September of 2020 and November of 2020? Have you read those reports?
I have had a chance to look at it.
Do you see any sign of Russian disinformation in those reports?
That would be a hard question for me to answer.
No, it's very easy. It's very easy.
What I would say
it's a very easy answer. There is no Russian disinformation. That report is completely clean of any interference of foreign influence, although we have been falsely accused, including by the chairman of this committee, of spreading Russian disinformation. Are you aware of the FBI having any involvement whatsoever in the October 19, 2020 public statement by 51 former intelligence officials?
I'm not aware of any involvement by the FBI in what you're describing.
The reason I ask is if it's true that in August of 2020 the FBI initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden, it would seem like maybe part of that scheme would be to get intelligence officials to issue a letter that stated that the laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian information operation. That was totally false. We now know that the Hunter laptop is completely authentic.